Captain Jake Morrison stared at the view screen as his ship drifted through the debris field. Chunks of twisted metal floated past the UNS Discovery like ghosts in the darkness. Some pieces were as small as his fist, others were bigger than his entire ship. They all glowed with a strange blue light that made his skin crawl. "Captain, we're picking up some unusual readings," said Dr. Lisa Campbell from her station. She was the ship's lead scientist, a woman who could make sense of alien technology better than anyone in the fleet. Her fingers danced across her console as data scrolled down the screen. "These fragments aren't natural. Someone built them." Morrison walked over to her station. The Discovery was a small research ship with only 12 crew members. They had been exploring the empty space near Vega for 3 months, looking for signs of ancient civilizations. So far, they had found nothing but rocks and ice. This debris field was the first interesting thing they had discovered. "How old are they?" Morrison asked. Dr. Campbell frowned at her readings. "That's the strange part. The computer says they're about 500,000 years old. But the material, I've never seen anything like this before. It's like someone took normal metals and changed them at the molecular level." Commander Ryan Torres looked up from the weapons console. He was Morrison's second in command, a man who had fought in 3 different wars before this assignment. "Could be a trap, Captain. We should be careful." Morrison nodded. Torres was right to be cautious. Space was full of dangers, and not all of them were natural. "Run a full scan, Dr. Campbell, but keep our shields up and weapons ready." The next few hours passed slowly as the science team worked to analyze the debris. Morrison watched from his captain's chair as his crew did their jobs. The Discovery might be small, but every person on board was among the best in their field. That was why the colonial fleet had sent them to explore this empty region of space. "Captain, I'm detecting some kind of data storage device," Dr. Campbell said suddenly. Her voice was excited but also worried. "It's embedded in one of the larger fragments. The power source is almost dead, but there might be enough energy left to access the data." Morrison felt his pulse quicken. Finding alien data was the kind of discovery that could change everything. "Can you bring it aboard safely?" "I think so. The fragment is small enough to fit in Cargo Bay 2. We'll need to keep it in a containment field until we know what we're dealing with." "Do it," Morrison ordered. 2 hours later, Morrison stood in the ship's laboratory watching Dr. Campbell work on the alien fragment. It was about the size of a basketball, made from some kind of crystalline material that seemed to shift color in the light. Thin cables connected it to the ship's computer system. "The data structure is incredibly complex," Dr. Campbell explained as she worked. "It's like they stored information in multiple dimensions, but I think I can decode it. The mathematical principles are similar to what we use, just much more advanced." Torres stood nearby with his hand on his sidearm. "Any sign of hostile code or viruses?" "Nothing like that," Dr. Campbell replied. "This seems to be some kind of historical record, maybe a log from a ship or a planetary database. I'm getting fragments of text in what looks like... Wait." She stopped working and stared at her screen. Her face went pale. "What is it?" Morrison asked. Dr. Campbell's voice was barely a whisper. "Captain, this text, some of it is in English." The laboratory fell silent except for the hum of the ship's engines. Morrison felt something cold settle in his stomach. "That's impossible. English is a human language. We've never encountered any other species that uses it." "I know, but look at this." Dr. Campbell transferred the data to the main screen. Lines of text appeared, some in alien symbols but others in clear English letters. "It's fragmented, but I can make out words. Earth. Human. Final transmission." Morrison read the partial text over Dr. Campbell's shoulder. What he saw made his blood run cold. The fragments talked about a planet called Earth, about billions of humans, about something terrible happening. But Earth was just a legend. Every human child learned the story in school. Long ago, humans had lived on a single world called Earth. But some great disaster had destroyed it, forcing the survivors to flee in colony ships to distant stars. That was thousands of generations ago. No one even knew where Earth had been, Located. Keep working, Morrison said quietly. I want to know everything this device can tell us. Dr. Campbell worked through the night. Morrison brought her coffee and food, but she barely noticed. She was completely focused on the alien data, her fingers flying across her keyboard as she slowly assembled the fragments into something readable. Finally, as the ship's day cycle was beginning, she called Morrison back to the laboratory. Torres came with him, along with Dr. Alan Price, the ship's historian. I've managed to reconstruct about 60% of the data, Dr. Campbell said. She looked exhausted, but her eyes were bright with discovery and fear. Captain, this isn't just a historical record. It's a final message. A warning sent out. Just before Earth was destroyed. She activated the main screen and text began to scroll past. Morrison read it aloud, his voice growing quieter with each line. Final transmission from Earth Defense Command. All colony ships receive and relay. Earth has fallen. The hegemony fleet has broken through our defenses. Our cities are burning. Our people are dying. This is not a natural disaster. We are being murdered. The laboratory was silent except for the sound of breathing. Morrison continued reading. The hegemony demanded our surrender 3 months ago. They wanted us to join their empire, to give up our freedom, to become slaves like all the other species they have conquered. We refused. Now they are making us pay the price. Torres cursed under his breath. Hegemony? What's the hegemony? Dr. Campbell pulled up another section of the data. From what I can tell, there's some kind of alien confederation. Multiple species working together. They've been conquering worlds for millions of years, building an empire that spans most of the galaxy. Morrison felt sick. Keep reading the message. The text continued, describing the final battle for Earth. Human ships fighting desperately against an enemy that outnumbered them 1,000 to 1, cities being burned from orbit, billions of people dying in the space of a few days. But the message also contained something else. Hope. 13 colony ships escaped before the final attack, Morrison read. The colonies at New Geneva, Armstrong's, World, Liberty Station, and 10 others. They carry our culture, our knowledge, our future. The hegemony believes they destroyed all humans. They think we are extinct. This is our advantage. The message went on to provide detailed information about hegemony technology, their weaknesses, the location of their command centers. It was intelligence gathered at the cost of Earth's entire population, preserved in crystalline storage that could survive for millions of years. There's more, Dr. Campbell said softly. She pulled up a star chart. Coordinates, not just for the colony worlds, but for hegemony positions, their fleet bases, their industrial centers, their homeworlds. Morrison stared at the star chart and felt something burning in his chest. Anger. Rage. His people had spent 500,000 years believing they were alone in the universe, that Earth had been destroyed by some cosmic accident. But it wasn't an accident, it was murder. Genocide on a scale that was almost impossible to imagine. Captain, Torres said quietly, what do we do with this information? Morrison looked around the laboratory at his crew. They were all staring at him, waiting for his decision. The smart thing would be to report this to Colonial Command and let them decide. The safe thing would be to forget what they had learned and go back to their peaceful lives. But Morrison thought about Earth, about billions of humans who had died fighting for their freedom, about children who had been murdered because their parents refused to become slaves, about a final message sent into the darkness hoping that someday their people would return and make things right. We're going home, Morrison said finally. All the way home, to every human colony. They need to know the truth about what happened to Earth. They need to know that we're not alone in the universe. He paused and looked at the alien data one more time. And they need to know that somewhere out there the creatures who murdered our ancestors are still alive. Still conquering worlds. Still destroying civilizations. Morrison's voice hardened. It's time for humanity to remember how to fight. 6 months had passed since the Discovery found the alien message. Captain Morrison stood in the council chamber on New Geneva, watching as representatives from 13 human colonies filled the room. These were the most powerful people in human space: presidents, admirals, scientists, and industrial leaders. All of them had come because of what his crew had discovered. President Helen Carter stood at the center of the room. She was a tall woman with gray hair and sharp eyes. She had been leading the United Colonial Assembly for 10 years, and Morrison had never seen her look so serious. "The evidence has been reviewed by our best scientists," President Carter said to the assembled crowd. "Dr. Campbell's findings have been confirmed. The message from Earth is real. The technology is authentic. Everything we believed about our history was wrong." A murmur went through the room. Morrison watched the faces of the colony leaders. Some looked angry. Others looked scared. A few looked excited, like they had been waiting their whole lives for something like this. Admiral Ben Hayes raised his hand. He was the commander of the colonial fleet, a man who controlled hundreds of warships scattered across human space. "What exactly are we dealing with? How big is this hegemony?" Dr. Campbell stood up from her seat. She had spent the last 6 months studying every piece of data from the alien device. "Based on the information we recovered, the hegemony controls approximately 40,000 star systems. They have subjugated over 300 different species. Their military consists of millions of ships." The room fell silent. Morrison could see the shock on everyone's faces. Humanity controlled exactly 13 star systems. Their entire fleet consisted of maybe 2,000 ships, most of them small patrol vessels or cargo haulers. 300 species, President Carter repeated slowly. "And they destroyed all of them?" "Not destroyed," Dr. Campbell corrected. "Enslaved. The hegemony doesn't wipe out entire civilizations unless they resist. They prefer to keep conquered species alive to work for them. Earth was special because we refused to surrender." Dr. Nina Rodriguez stood up next. She was the head of the Colonial Research Institute, the woman responsible for most of humanity's technological advances. "We need to understand something important. The data from Earth shows that we've been developing differently than the hegemony expects. We've had 500,000 years to evolve our technology without outside interference." Morrison nodded. He had seen the same thing in the alien records. The hegemony's technology was incredibly advanced, but it was also ancient. They had been using the same basic designs for millions of years, only making small improvements. Humanity had been forced to innovate, to create new solutions to survive in harsh environments. "What kind of advantages are we talking about?" asked Governor Frank Miller from Armstrong's World. Dr. Rodriguez smiled grimly. "Our computers are faster. Our engines are more efficient. Our weapons pack more power into smaller packages. Most importantly, our ships can be built and repaired much more quickly than theirs." Admiral Hayes leaned forward. "How do you know that?" "Because the Earth records include detailed scans of hegemony ships," Dr. Rodriguez explained. "They're massive, heavily armored, and incredibly powerful. But they're also slow and expensive to build. Each one takes years to construct and requires resources from multiple star systems." Morrison had studied those same records. The hegemony built their ships like fortresses designed to intimidate and overwhelm. Human ships were built like hunting knives, sharp and fast and deadly. President Carter looked around the room. "The question before us is simple. Do we stay, hidden, and hope the hegemony never finds us, or do we act?" "Act how?" asked Governor Sarah Kim from Liberty Station. "You're talking about going to war against an empire that spans half the galaxy." Commander Torres, who had been promoted to admiral after the discovery, stood up. "I've been running reconnaissance missions for the past 3 months. The hegemony isn't as strong as they used to be. They've gotten lazy. Most of their border worlds are barely defended." Morrison felt a surge of pride. Torres had volunteered for the dangerous job of scouting hegemony space, taking a single stealth ship into enemy territory to gather intelligence. The information he brought back had been crucial. "The hegemony thinks they've won," Torres continued. "They believe they're the only advanced civilization left in the galaxy. Their ships patrol on predictable schedules. Their commanders follow ancient tactics that haven't changed in thousands of years. They're not prepared for a real fight." Dr. Campbell activated a holographic display in the center of the room. It showed a three-dimensional map of the local galaxy, with hegemony territory marked in red and human colonies in blue. The human worlds looked like tiny islands in an ocean of red. The Earth records identified 13 key systems that support the hegemony's power structure, she explained. These are their main industrial centers, their fleet bases, their command nodes. If we could disrupt even half of them, it would cripple their ability to respond to threats. Morrison studied the map. The hegemony systems were spread out across thousands of light years, but there were patterns, supply lines, communication networks, trade routes. The aliens had built their empire to be efficient, not to defend against attacks from within. "This is madness," said Governor Patricia Walsh from New Dublin. "We're talking about 13 worlds, against 40,000. Even if we win every battle, they'll eventually overwhelm us through sheer numbers." President Carter nodded. "Governor Walsh raises a valid concern, but we need to consider the alternative. The hegemony is still expanding. They're still conquering new worlds. Eventually, they'll find us whether we want them to or not." Admiral Hayes cleared his throat. "There's another factor to consider. The other enslaved species. If we could free some of them, turn them against the hegemony, we wouldn't be fighting alone." Morrison liked that idea. The Earth records had shown that many species had been forced to join the hegemony against their will. Some of them had been fighting resistance movements for thousands of years, waiting for a chance to break free. Dr. Rodriguez stood up again. "I've been working on something that might help. Remember, the hegemony has been using the same technology for millions of years. That means their systems are standardized across their entire empire. If we can crack their computer codes, we could potentially shut down their ships, their weapons, their communications." She activated another display, showing technical diagrams of hegemony equipment. "The Earth records include detailed scans of their technology. We've already identified several vulnerabilities. With enough time and resources, we could develop weapons specifically designed to exploit their weaknesses." Morrison felt excitement building in his chest. For the first time since they found the alien message, he was starting to believe they might actually have a chance. President Carter called for a vote. All in favor of beginning military preparations for a conflict with the hegemony. One by one, hands rose around the room. Morrison counted them. 8 votes in favor, 5 against. It wasn't unanimous, but it was enough. "The motion passes," President Carter announced. "Admiral Hayes, you have authorization to begin expanding the colonial fleet. Dr. Rodriguez, you have unlimited resources for weapons development. Admiral Torres, continue your reconnaissance missions and begin planning strike operations." She paused and looked around the room one more time. "We're not just doing this for revenge, though that would be reason enough. We're doing this because, somewhere out there, other civilizations are being enslaved right now. Other worlds are being conquered. Other children are being born into slavery because their parents have no choice." Morrison felt a chill run down his spine as President Carter continued. "Earth sent us a message across 500,000 years. They told us about the enemy. They gave us the tools we need to fight. Now it's our turn to send a message back, not through space, but through fire and steel." The room was completely silent. "The hegemony thinks humanity is extinct. They think our story ended with Earth. They're about to learn that they were wrong. Our story is just beginning." As the meeting ended and the colony leaders began to leave, Morrison caught Torres by the arm. "How long do you think we have before they're ready?" Morrison asked. Torres looked thoughtful. 2 years, maybe 3. Hayes will need time to build the ships. Rodriguez will need time to develop the weapons. And we'll need time to train crews who can fight this kind of war." Morrison nodded. 2 years seemed like a long time, but he knew it would pass quickly. Soon humanity would be at war with an empire that had ruled the galaxy for millions of years. He thought about the final message from Earth, about the people who had died fighting for their freedom. They had been waiting 500,000 years for this moment. Finally, their children were coming home to finish the fight. 2 years had passed since the meeting on New Geneva. Admiral Torres stood on the bridge of the UNS Lightning, watching his fleet drop out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler system. 60 human ships appeared in the darkness, their hulls gleaming with new armor and weapons that had never been tested in real combat. "All ships report ready, Admiral," said Commander Kate Murphy from the communications station. She was young, barely out of the Naval Academy, but Torres trusted her completely. Every person in the fleet had volunteered for this mission, knowing they might not come home. Torres studied the tactical display. The Kepler system contained a hegemony outpost with 12 alien ships and a small military base on the fourth planet. According to their intelligence, it was a minor facility used for refueling and resupply. But it was also humanity's first target, the beginning of Operation Nemesis. "Signal the fleet," Torres ordered. "Execute Attack Plan Alpha." The human ships spread out in a formation that would have puzzled the aliens. Instead of advancing in a solid line like traditional naval tactics, they moved in small groups, each one taking a different approach to the target. This was something new, something the hegemony had never seen before. The first hegemony ship to detect them was a heavy cruiser called the Dominion's Fist. Its captain, a reptilian creature named Vex Korath, had been patrolling this system for 30 years without ever seeing combat. When his sensors picked up the approaching human fleet, he assumed it was a sensor malfunction. "Impossible," Vex Korath hissed to his bridge crew. "The humans are extinct. We destroyed their homeworld 500,000 years ago." But the sensor readings were clear. 60 unknown ships were approaching at combat speed, their weapons powered and ready to fire. Vex Korath sounded the alarm and called for reinforcements from the other hegemony ships in the system. The battle began badly for the aliens. Human ships moved faster than anything the hegemony had ever encountered. They used hit-and-run tactics, appearing suddenly to unleash devastating attacks before vanishing back into the darkness. Their weapons were different too, focused beams of energy that could punch through hegemony shields like they were made of paper. Torres watched from the Lightning's bridge as his pilots performed maneuvers that would have been impossible in the old days. The new human ships were built smaller and lighter than hegemony vessels, but their engines were twice as powerful. They could accelerate, turn, and change direction so quickly that the alien gunners could barely track them. "The hegemony ships are trying to form a defensive line," reported Lieutenant Dan Foster from the tactical station. "But our fighters are getting through their formation." Torres smiled grimly. Human fighters were another innovation that the hegemony hadn't expected. Small, fast ships with single pilots, they could swarm around the massive alien vessels like angry wasps. Each fighter carried enough firepower to damage a ship 10 times its size. Captain Morrison, now commanding the heavy cruiser UNS Retribution, led the main assault on the hegemony base. His ship had been built using the latest human technology, combining speed and firepower in ways that the aliens couldn't match. The Retribution's main guns fired in rapid succession, each shot precisely targeted at the base's defensive systems. "Their shields are down," Morrison reported over the fleet communication system, moving in for the final attack. But the aliens weren't helpless. The Dominion's Fist managed to score a direct hit on one of the human destroyers, the UNS Brave. Torres watched in horror as the ship broke apart, its crew of 200 people lost in an instant. "Admiral, we're getting a transmission from the alien commander," Commander Murphy announced. Torres nodded. "Put it through." The view screen flickered, and the image of Vex Korath appeared. The alien was tall and covered in green scales with yellow eyes that burned with hatred. "I am Vex Korath of the Hegemony Third Fleet," the alien said in accented English. "You will surrender immediately or face complete destruction." Torres looked at the alien commander and felt no fear, only anger. This creature represented everything that had destroyed Earth, everything that had murdered billions of humans 500,000 years ago. "I am Admiral Torres of the Human Colonial Fleet," he replied. "We don't surrender to murderers." Vex, Korath's eyes widened in shock. "Humans? But you are extinct. We destroyed your species long ago." "You destroyed our homeworld," Torres said coldly. "But we survived. We grew stronger. And now we've come back to return the favor." The transmission ended and the battle resumed with even greater intensity. The hegemony ships fought desperately, but they were outmatched. Human technology had advanced beyond anything the aliens could imagine. Human tactics were completely different from anything they had encountered in millions of years of conquest. Within 3 hours, the battle was over. All 12 hegemony ships had been destroyed or captured. The military base on the fourth planet had surrendered after human marines landed and overwhelmed the alien defenders. Torres stood on his bridge, looking at the tactical display that showed complete victory. But the celebration was short-lived. Dr. Rodriguez, monitoring the battle from her command center on New Geneva, detected something troubling in the long-range sensors. "Admiral Torres, we have a problem." Her voice crackled over the communication system. "I'm detecting massive energy signatures moving toward your position. It looks like the hegemony is sending reinforcements." Torres felt his stomach drop. "How many ships?" "At least 300. Maybe more. They'll be there in 6 hours." The admiral looked around his bridge. His fleet had won the first battle, but they had also lost ships and people. They weren't ready for another fight, especially not against odds of 5-1. "All ships, prepare for immediate withdrawal," Torres ordered. "We're leaving the system." But as the human fleet prepared to retreat, they received another piece of bad news. Captain Morrison's voice came over the communication system, tight with worry. "Admiral, we just intercepted a hegemony transmission. They're sending a punitive fleet to one of our colonies. New Sparta is going to be attacked." Torres closed his eyes. New Sparta was one of humanity's most important worlds, home to 3 billion people and major industrial centers. If the hegemony destroyed it, they would cripple humanity's ability to continue the war. "How long do we have?" Torres asked. 18 hours, maybe less." Torres made his decision quickly. "Signal the New Sparta defense fleet. Tell them to begin immediate evacuation of all civilians. We're heading there now." The human fleet jumped to hyperspace, racing toward New Sparta as fast as their engines could carry them. But Torres knew they would arrive too late to prevent the attack. The best they could hope for was to save as many people as possible. Meanwhile, at the hegemony's central command center, the alien leadership was meeting in emergency session. The hierarch, supreme ruler of the hegemony, sat on his throne listening to reports from his generals. The attack on Kepler was not random, General Thax reported. The humans knew exactly where to strike for maximum effect. "They have detailed intelligence about our operations." The hierarch was an ancient being, older than some stars. He had ruled the hegemony for millions of years, crushing hundreds of rebellions and conquering thousands of worlds. But he had never encountered anything like this. "How many humans are there?" the hierarch asked. "Unknown, my lord. Our records show that we destroyed their homeworld completely. There should be no survivors." The hierarch's voice was cold as ice. "Obviously our records are wrong. Find out where they're hiding, find out how many of them there are, and then destroy them all." General Thax bowed. "Yes, my lord. I'm already deploying battle fleets to hunt them down." Back in human space, the evacuation of New Sparta was proceeding as quickly as possible. Transport ships filled with refugees were jumping to safety every few minutes. But 3 billion people couldn't be moved overnight. Torres arrived at New Sparta just as the hegemony fleet dropped out of hyperspace. 500 alien ships led by massive dreadnoughts that were each larger than entire human cities. The enemy had come in overwhelming force, determined to make an example of humanity's defiance. "All civilian transports continue evacuation procedures," Torres broadcast to the planet. "Defense fleet, prepare for combat." But even as he gave the order, Torres knew it was hopeless. The human defense fleet consisted of 40 ships. The hegemony had brought 500. The math was simple and terrifying. The aliens opened fire first, their massive weapons reaching across space to strike at the human ships. Torres watched as the destroyer UNS Freedom exploded under the alien bombardment. Then the cruiser UNS Liberty suffered a direct hit and went spinning out of control. "Admiral, we can't hold them," Captain Morrison reported from the Retribution. "They're going to break through our defensive line." Torres looked at the tactical display and saw that Morrison was right. The hegemony ships were advancing steadily, their overwhelming firepower smashing through human defenses. In a few more minutes, They would reach the planet and begin the bombardment. But then something unexpected happened. The hegemony fleet suddenly stopped advancing. Their ships began to turn away from New Sparta, heading back toward the edge of the system. "What's happening?" Torres demanded. The war had been raging for 8 months when Captain Morrison received his most dangerous mission yet. He stood in the briefing room aboard the orbital station above New Geneva, studying a holographic image of something that seemed impossible. "This is the hegemony's primary energy facility," Dr. Rodriguez explained to the assembled officers. "It's built around a red giant star in the Draco sector. The entire star is surrounded by a massive shell that collects its energy and converts it into power for their war machine." Morrison stared at the image. The structure was enormous, easily 100 times larger than any human space station. It looked like someone had built a metal sphere around an entire sun, with millions of collection arrays and processing centers covering its surface. "How much power are we talking about?" asked Commander Torres, who had been promoted again after leading several successful raids on hegemony supply lines. "Enough to run their entire empire," Dr. Rodriguez replied. "This facility provides energy for their planet-killing weapons, their massive shipyards, their communication networks across 40,000 star systems. If we could destroy it, we would cripple their ability to fight." Admiral Hayes leaned forward in his chair. "What makes you think we can get close to something like that? They must have thousands of ships protecting it." Dr. Campbell stood up and activated another display. She had been studying hegemony technology for over a year now, becoming humanity's leading expert on alien systems. "That's the interesting part. The facility is so large and so important that they don't keep a big fleet there. They assume nothing could threaten it." She pointed to various sections of the sphere. "The structure is incredibly strong, but it's also incredibly old. Most of it was built millions of years ago using the same technology the hegemony has always used. And thanks to the Earth records, we know exactly how their systems work." Morrison felt a familiar excitement building in his chest. This was the kind of impossible mission that could change the entire war. "What's the plan?" Dr. Rodriguez smiled grimly. "We've developed a computer virus specifically designed to attack hegemony systems. If we can get close enough to upload it into their network, it will cause a cascade failure throughout the entire facility." "How close is close enough?" Morrison asked. "You'll need to land on the facility's surface and plug directly into their main computer core," Dr. Campbell explained. "The shell is so large that sensors can't monitor the entire surface at once. A small team might be able to approach undetected." Admiral Hayes shook his head. "Even if you could get there undetected, how would you get back? Once that virus starts working, every hegemony ship in the sector will be heading for that facility." Morrison looked around the room at his fellow officers. These were people he had served with for years, friends who had trusted him with their lives in dozens of battles. "Who says we're planning to get back?" The room fell silent. Everyone understood what Morrison was suggesting. This would be a suicide mission, a one-way trip into the heart of enemy territory. "Captain, you don't have to do this," Admiral Hayes said quietly. "We can find another way." Morrison thought about Earth, about the billions of people who had died 500,000 years ago. They had fought to the end, knowing they couldn't win, hoping that someday their children would finish what they had started. "No, sir. We can't find another way," Morrison replied. "This is our chance to strike at the heart of their empire. We have to take it." 3 weeks later, Morrison stood on the bridge of a specially modified ship called the UNS Phantom. It was built for stealth, designed to slip through enemy sensors without being detected. His crew consisted of 12 volunteers, all of them knowing this would be their final mission. Dr. Campbell was with them, along with Dr. Rodriguez and a team of technical specialists. They would need expert knowledge to navigate the alien facility and plant the virus in the right location. The journey to the Draco sector took 5 days. Morrison spent the time studying detailed maps of the facility, memorizing every corridor and computer terminal they might encounter. The structure was so massive that it had its own internal transportation system, with thousands of kilometers of tunnels connecting different sections. "We're approaching the target," announced Lieutenant Sarah Park from the pilot station. She was the best stealth pilot in the human fleet, capable of flying through sensor fields without triggering alarms. Morrison looked at the view screen and saw the facility for the first time with his own eyes. It was even more impressive than the holographic displays had shown. The metal sphere completely surrounded the red giant star, its surface covered with millions of energy collectors that glowed like tiny suns. "I'm detecting patrol ships," Lieutenant Park reported. 6 heavy cruisers moving in standard formation, but they're staying close to the main docking stations. The outer surface looks clear. Dr. Campbell studied her scanner readings. The facility is so large that they can't monitor every section continuously. Their sensors sweep back and forth in regular patterns. If we time it right, we can land during a sensor gap. Morrison nodded. "Take us in." The Phantom moved slowly toward the facility's surface, using the red giant's radiation to mask its energy signature. Lieutenant Park flew with incredible skill, threading the ship between sensor sweeps and finding a landing spot on the outer hull. "We're down," she reported. "Docking clamps engaged, but we won't be able to stay hidden for long. The next sensor sweep will detect us for sure." Morrison stood up and checked his equipment one final time. He carried a standard assault rifle, several explosive charges, and a small computer device containing the virus Dr. Rodriguez had developed. "How long do we have?" Dr. Campbell consulted her instruments. 45 minutes until the next sweep. After that, they'll know we're here." The team moved quickly through the facility's corridors. The interior was a maze of tunnels and chambers, all built on a scale designed for creatures much larger than humans. Emergency lighting cast strange shadows on the metal walls, and the air hummed with the sound of massive machinery. "The main computer core should be just ahead," Dr. Campbell whispered as they approached a heavily secured doorway. "But there might be automated defenses." Morrison signaled for his team to take cover as he examined the door. It was made of some kind of alien metal that seemed to shift color in the light. Strange symbols covered its surface, probably warnings in various hegemony languages. Dr. Rodriguez connected her portable computer to the door's control system. "I can override the locks, but it will trigger alarms throughout this section of the facility." "Do it," Morrison ordered. "We're running out of time anyway." The door slid open with a grinding sound, revealing a chamber that took Morrison's breath away. The computer core was a massive crystal structure that extended upward for hundreds of meters, pulsing with patterns of light that hurt to look at directly. Data streams flowed through the crystal like liquid electricity, controlling systems across the entire facility. But what shocked Morrison most was what he saw floating in alcoves around the chamber. Thousands of transparent containers, each one holding what looked like a human brain suspended in glowing fluid. "My God," Dr. Campbell whispered. "Those aren't just computer storage devices. They're actual consciousness matrices. The hegemony has been storing the minds of every species they've conquered." Morrison stared at the containers and felt sick. Some of the brains were obviously alien, but others looked disturbingly human. "Are you saying those are the minds of people from Earth?" Dr. Rodriguez was already scanning the containers with her instruments. "Not just Earth. Every world the hegemony has ever destroyed. They don't just kill civilizations. They preserve their consciousness and use them as biological computers." Morrison felt rage building inside him. The hegemony hadn't just murdered his ancestors, they had enslaved their very souls, forcing them to work for their conquerors for eternity. "Can we free them?" Morrison asked. Dr. Rodriguez looked at her scanner readings. "Maybe. The virus I designed could disrupt the containment systems. But if we do that, we won't be able to control what happens. Some of the consciousness matrices might survive the transition to freedom, but others..." She didn't need to finish. Morrison understood. Freeing the enslaved minds would be an act of mercy, but it might also destroy them completely. "We have to try," Morrison said finally. "These people have been prisoners for millions of years. They deserve a chance at freedom, even if it means risking everything." Alarms started blaring throughout the facility as hegemony security forces detected the intrusion. Morrison could hear the sound of heavy footsteps approaching through the corridors. "Upload the virus," Morrison ordered. "All of it. Free everyone." Dr. Rodriguez connected her device to the main computer core and began the upload process. The Crystal structure flickered as the human virus spread through the hegemony's network, disrupting systems and freeing enslaved minds across the facility. Upload complete, Dr. Rodriguez announced. The cascade failure should begin in 30 seconds. Morrison looked around the chamber one last time, watching as the consciousness containers began to glow brighter. Some of them were already opening, releasing minds that had been trapped for longer than human civilization had existed. The destruction of the energy facility sent shockwaves across the entire hegemony empire. Admiral Torres watched from the bridge of his flagship as the massive sphere around the red giant star broke apart like a cracking egg. Pieces larger than moons flew in all directions, and the star itself began to pulse with unstable energy. "Admiral, we're receiving transmissions from all over hegemony space," reported Commander Murphy. "Their communication networks are failing. Power grids are shutting down. Ship after ship is going dark." Torres felt a grim satisfaction as he watched the alien empire begin to collapse. Captain Morrison and his team had done the impossible. Their sacrifice had crippled the hegemony's ability to fight, but Torres knew the war was far from over. "Signal. All human fleets," Torres ordered. "Begin Phase 2 operations immediately. Hit every hegemony stronghold while they're still confused and powerless." Across human space, Admiral Hayes was already mobilizing the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled. 3,000 ships of all sizes, from massive battleships to small fighters, began moving toward their targets. This was the moment they had been preparing for since the discovery of Earth's final message. But the most important battle would be fought in a place that held special meaning for every human alive. Dr. Campbell, who had miraculously survived the facility's destruction by escaping in an emergency pod, had decoded the location of humanity's original homeworld. Earth still existed, a dead rock orbiting a dying sun, but it was also the symbolic heart of everything they were fighting for. The hierarch, supreme ruler of the hegemony, had made Earth his final stronghold. His personal fleet of 500 ships surrounded the dead planet, using it as a fortress from which to coordinate the defense of his crumbling empire. Torres stood in the command center on New Geneva, watching reports flow in from battlefields across the galaxy. Human forces were winning everywhere. Without their energy networks and computer systems, hegemony ships were fighting blind and powerless. "Admiral, we're getting reports from the liberated consciousness matrices," Dr. Rodriguez announced. "Some of the freed minds have managed to take control of hegemony ships. They're turning the alien fleets against each other." Torres smiled. The enslaved souls that Morrison had freed were getting their revenge, using their knowledge of hegemony systems to turn the aliens' own weapons against them. It was poetic justice on a galactic scale. President Carter appeared on the main view screen, broadcasting from her emergency command bunker. "Admiral Torres, you have authorization for the final operation. Bring our people home." Torres nodded. Home. After 500,000 years, humanity was finally going back to Earth. The journey to the Sol system took 3 days. Torres led a fleet of 200 ships, the most powerful vessels in the human navy. As they approached the outer edge of Earth's solar system, they could see the hegemony fleet waiting for them. "Long-range sensors show 500 enemy ships," reported Lieutenant Foster. "They're in a defensive formation around Earth. The hierarch's flagship is positioned directly above the planet." Torres studied the tactical display. The enemy still had superior numbers, but their ships were operating on emergency power. Many of their weapon systems were offline, and their shields were weakened. "Open a channel to the enemy fleet," Torres ordered. The view screen flickered, and the image of the hierarch appeared. The alien ruler was ancient beyond imagination, his scaled skin marked with scars from countless battles. His eyes burned with hatred as he stared at Torres. "So the humans returned to their grave," the hierarch said in a voice like grinding stone. "How fitting. You will die where your species began, just as your ancestors died 500,000 years ago." Torres looked at the creature that had ordered the destruction of Earth and felt no fear, only determination. "Your empire is falling apart, hierarch. Your ships are powerless. Your enslaved worlds are breaking free. Surrender now, and we'll show you more mercy than you showed our ancestors." The hierarch laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Mercy? I have ruled this galaxy for millions of years. I have destroyed thousands of species. I will not surrender to a handful of primitive mammals. Then you'll die like the monster you are, Torres replied, and cut the transmission. The final battle began as human ships spread out across the solar system. They moved in the same unpredictable patterns that had confused the hegemony from the beginning, striking fast and hard before disappearing into the darkness between planets. Dr. Campbell, now commanding her own science vessel, led a special mission to Earth's surface. Her ship, the UNS Discovery, landed in the ruins of what had once been a great human city. She stepped out onto the dead soil of humanity's homeworld, carrying a device that would broadcast a message to every human ship in the fleet. "This is Dr. Campbell transmitting from Earth," she said into her communicator. "I'm standing where our ancestors lived and died. I can see the ruins of their cities, the bones of their world, but I can also see something else." She looked up at the sky where human ships were fighting desperately against overwhelming odds. "I can see hope. I can see the future our ancestors died to protect. We are their children, and we have come home to finish what they started." Above the planet, Torres watched as his ships began to take heavy casualties. The hegemony vessels might be weakened, but they were still dangerous. The human destroyer UNS Courage exploded under alien fire, taking 200 crew members with it. But then something extraordinary happened. Ships began appearing all across the solar system, emerging from hyperspace in groups of dozens. Torres stared at his sensors in amazement as the readings climbed higher and higher. "Admiral, we're receiving identification signals," Commander Murphy announced with excitement in her voice. "Those are the freed consciousness matrices. They've managed to take control of entire hegemony fleets, and they're joining our side." Torres watched in wonder as thousands of alien ships turned their weapons against their former masters. The enslaved minds that Morrison had freed were finally getting their revenge, using hegemony technology to destroy the empire that had oppressed them for millions of years. The tide of battle turned quickly after that. The Hierarch's fleet found itself outnumbered, 10-1 as former slaves turned against their oppressors. Ship after ship exploded under the combined assault of human forces and liberated alien fleets. Torres led the final assault on the Hierarch's flagship, a massive dreadnought that was larger than some space stations. The UNS Lightning, along with 5 other human ships, closed in on the alien vessel as it tried desperately to escape. "This is for Earth," Torres said as he gave the order to fire. The combined firepower of 6 human ships struck the Hierarch's flagship simultaneously. The ancient vessel, symbol of an empire that had ruled the galaxy for millions of years, broke apart in a brilliant explosion that lit up the entire solar system. As the debris settled, Torres received reports from across the galaxy. Hegemony forces were surrendering everywhere. Their command structure had collapsed, their fleets had turned against them, and their enslaved worlds were declaring independence. Dr. Rodriguez appeared on the view screen from her laboratory ship. "Admiral, we're getting confirmation from all sectors. The hegemony empire has fallen. After millions of years, they're finally defeated." Torres looked out at the stars and thought about all the people who had died to make this moment possible. The billions who had perished on Earth 500,000 years ago. Captain Morrison and his team, who had sacrificed themselves to free the enslaved minds. The thousands of human soldiers and sailors who had given their lives in the final battles. But he also thought about the future. The galaxy was free now, open to all species who chose peace over conquest. The enslaved worlds were independent, their people finally able to determine their own destiny. President Carter's voice came over the communication system, addressing the entire human fleet. "Today, we have fulfilled the promise made by our ancestors 500,000 years ago. We have returned to Earth. We have avenged our dead, and we have freed the galaxy from tyranny." She paused, and Torres could hear the emotion in her voice. "But our work is not finished. We must help rebuild what the hegemony destroyed. We must ensure that no species ever again faces the choice between slavery and extinction. We must guard the peace that so many died to achieve." Torres looked out at Earth, the dead world that had given birth to humanity's greatest triumph. Soon they would begin the long process of bringing life back to their homeworld. They would plant trees in the ashes of ancient cities, fill the seas with water, and restore the blue skies that their ancestors had known. Dr. Campbell's voice came over the communication system one final time. "Admiral, I'm reading something interesting in the planet's geological layers. It looks like Earth is beginning to heal itself. Given enough time and help, this world could be green again." Torres smiled. After 500,000 years of exile, humanity was finally coming home. And this time they would never leave again. The war was over. The hegemony was defeated. The galaxy was free. And somewhere in the ruins of an ancient city on Earth, the wind began to blow across ground where flowers would someday grow again.